Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining me for one of our regular updates from our nation's capital. If I'm looking a little bleary-eyed, okay, that's got to. Okay. If I'm looking a little bleary-eyed, it's because we were voting last night till about midnight, and Tim Kaine and I then were back on the Capitol grounds this morning at 8:30, where we had our monthly or annual, veterans celebration, where veterans from across Virginia came in and were welcome to one of our Commonwealth coffees. So I got three things I want to go through at the top of this presentation. The good news is, or slightly good news, is that we're not looking at a government shutdown coming right before Thanksgiving or coming right before Christmas. That's the good news. The bad news is that we still can't give federal workers, federal programs, federal contractors the assurance they need, because the crowd in the House has now scheduled two more future cliffs, one January 19th and the other February 2nd. I know in some of the press up here, a Republican described the House that the clowns driving the bus are still the same. And I'm not going to disparage the House leadership and call them clowns, but I will absolutely make clear that this is a group of folks that have never run a business. They are obviously politicians first, second, and third, because anyone who's ever run a business, the way I have, knows that when you say to half the government, we're not going to give you any predictability through 4 months of the year, that'll be the January 19th cutoff date, recognizing the fiscal year starts October 1st, and give the other half of the government, including the Defense Department, no assuredness until early February, 5 months into the fiscal year, you are costing taxpayers millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. And again, when a continuing resolution is in place, it basically says you are simply taking all of the funding programs from last year and continuing them. Now, the craziness of that, and I was down a month or so ago with our friends in Hampton Roads from the shipbuilders community, and ship repair, is a very important part of Virginia's economy, a critical part of Hampton Roads' economy. And the men and women who work in ship repair, they know the wackiness of CRs better than anyone, because the way the defense budget works is, if you finished repairing a ship, say mid-September, the ship leaves and you're scheduled to bring a new ship in, but that is only funded in this coming year or our current year's budget, you don't go to work. Now, there are ways we can get exemptions and exceptions called anomalies, but the basic tenet is that it is a crazy way to run the largest organization in our country, the federal government. So thank God we can get through Thanksgiving and Christmas without the threat of a shutdown. But what the long-term damage this does to the businesses who interact with the federal government, frankly, just for the mental health of our federal employees who will have to deal with the potential two more shutdown dates, January and February, it's the wrong way to operate. Second subject I want to raise is the ever getting stranger story of the FBI and the obviously political process that corrupted the whole selection process. And I encourage any reporter on this line to not take my word for it, but to go back and review the facts. This is a process that's drawn out for about 10 years. Well over a year ago, the GSA and the FBI came out with a set of criteria that were announced in, I believe, August of 2022. Our friends on the Maryland side thought that criteria, which Virginia would clearly win, fought tooth and nail to try to change the criteria. They were unsuccessful in changing the criteria, although Virginia took a hit on some of our funding issues, and that was resolved around the holidays of 2022. In March, of this calendar year, we did agree that each state would have a chance to make another presentation. We presented Virginia's case, the governor, senators, members of Congress, business, faith leaders, diversity community leaders, to the GSA and the FBI. Maryland did the same. We felt very good about that presentation. Even then, we were then shocked last, I believe, or this year, June, July timeframe, when, against all fairness, the GSA changed the criteria. We still felt, even under the change criteria, that Virginia would be successful. We knew there was huge political pressure being put on the administration. So when we heard the word that Maryland had been selected last week, and GSA didn't even give us the common courtesy of notifying us, we had to hear it through the press, we were disappointed, and felt the process had been fundamentally undermined. But candidly, and I've been a senator and a governor for a while, I'm used to seeing things I don't agree with. But last Thursday, when the FBI director, in an unprecedented way, pointed out how politically manipulated this process has been, I got to tell you, even I was shocked. Because even with the changed criteria, the professional staff, career officials, 2 GSA, 1 FBI, even with the changed criteria, still unanimously picked Virginia. And suddenly some political appointee is inserted into the process, taking out another career official. That political appointee and the FBI director lays out in great detail how that criteria was then manipulated, overrules the career professionals. And we then see this result that Maryland is selected. And interestingly enough, and I don't know this political appointee, that individual left the government to go work at a different assignment, so the ability to even question that former political appointee who overturned the career professionals has been undermined. And I said before, and I say this frankly disappointedly, this kind of manipulative political behavior, I might have expected it from the Trump administration. I expected better from this current administration. So the Virginia delegation, in a bipartisan way, has called on the Inspector General at the GSA to do an investigation. I think Virginia, who's put forward a strong case, our site's better on cost, on value to the FBI, on, I believe, in questions around diversity, on the ability to be built in a quick fashion. This is a federally owned site. I think we win in virtually all of those criteria. It needs to be reviewed. And I implore the administration to also listen to the men and women who work at the FBI. There have been political attacks against the director because he's laid out these facts. But somebody has, as my office got contacted, doesn't anybody really want to know what the folks who work at the FBI think is the best choice? So we need that in IG investigation. We need to throw out that process that resulted in this political manipulation. And unfortunately, we need to start afresh. Final comment before we go to your questions is that while there is the ability to make sure we fund the government, that issue has been taken off the table for the balance of this calendar year. One thing we cannot punt on is the need to take up the president's request for supplemental assistance in terms of some of the foreign policy concerns. That supplemental funding assistance includes funding for Ukraine, funding for Israel, funding for humanitarian relief, and funding that would go into the Indo-Pacific region. I strongly believe, and the thing that I shared with our veterans this morning was that all are important, but the clock is ticking on Ukraine. The clock is ticking on whether we are willing to stand with a fellow democracy and our fellow NATO members to stand up against Vladimir Putin's bloody, illegal, war crime-driven invasion of Ukraine. And the absurdity of some folks who say, I don't care about Putin and Ukraine, but I care about Iran, or I care about President Xi and China's aggressive natures in the Indo-Pacific. I've said this many times, if they don't understand that if you give an authoritarian leader like Putin a win, that's a win for Iran, it's a win for China as well. So we must get that additional assistance completed before year's end. The world is watching, and I believe if we fail to do that, particularly with Ukraine needing this additional assistance, it will be regarded as one of the great historic mistakes, probably the most significant historic mistake, at least of the 21st century to this point. With that, why don't I go ahead and stop now and take some questions. Laura?
Senator, our first question will be Leonard Fleming with DC News Now.
Senator, how are you? Thanks for doing this. Wanted to ask a couple of questions here, and that is, number one, first question, what are you hoping the Inspector General to do here? I mean, are you hoping the Inspector General will stop the process, start it over, conduct an investigation, award Virginia the site? What are you hoping? And number two, how do you respond to Maryland's assertion that their site is superior, they're shovel ready to go, their site is millions less? How do you respond to that?
Well, let me take them in reverse order. You know, of course, Maryland is advocating their site. Virginia is advocating our site. You know, that's a fair competitive process. So that's why you have a process where you allow not politicians, but career professionals that can evaluate these criteria. And again, I point out, and I think this is so incredibly important, the criteria were changed to favor Maryland. And even with that changed criteria, all three of the career professionals chose Virginia. Even with the criteria that Maryland thought favored them, our site was so superior that all three of the career professionals chose Virginia. That is a irrefutable fact. And no matter how many press conferences or high fives that are taking place on the Maryland side, that fact has to be reviewed. So, you know, what I expect the Inspector General to do is, let's get all the facts out. Let's look at why and how this political appointee appears, at least, to have come in and changed criteria even after the new criteria had been put forward. And now, do I expect an Inspector General to give the site to Virginia? No, but I do think the Inspector General would say the current process stinks. It stinks to high heaven. When you have the director of the FBI go public calling out the impropriety, you sure as heck can't just turn your head and try to look the other way and ignore the facts.
Senator, our next question will be Mitchell Miller with WTOP. Mitchell? Okay, we're going to move on to Tom Fitzgerald with Fox 5.
Senator, good afternoon. Thanks for doing the call. Speaking of the FBI, but on a different direction, Director Wray was at a House Homeland Security Committee meeting yesterday, and along with Secretary Mayorkas, talked about what they described as an elevated threat level right now and multiple investigations underway for individuals connected to Hamas. In your capacity as the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, how concerned should we be right now that the United States homeland could be a target of terrorism here, given the U.S.'s role right now in supporting Israel in its war against Hamas?
Well, Tom, I didn't see Secretary of Homeland Security or the FBI director's testimony, and I'm going to pursue that once this call is over. I do know that as of I believe the last brief, today's Thursday, I think the last brief I got on this subject was Tuesday. And at least as of Tuesday, and Lord knows that's only 36 hours ago, but this is an extraordinarily troubling time, the focus in terms of threats to the homeland would come from a homegrown terrorist or someone that may be inspired by the activities or sympathy for Hamas. I have not heard the idea of this direct connection. I need to look at that. But this idea that some person may be inspired by the violence and the terrorist type activities that Hamas perpetrated against 1,200 innocent, not just Israeli, but Israeli, Thai, Palestinian citizens on October 7th, I think we have to be on guard. And this is one of the real challenges that I've been working on. I mean, sympathy for the Palestinian people and empathy for the Palestinian people and the horrific numbers of civilian casualties, which we need to continue to pressure Israel to be more targeted, doesn't mean you have then flipped that into support for Hamas. Hamas is a terrorist organization. I also, at the same time, worry we've got a lot of federal employees in this region. Senator Kaine and I recently wrote the director of the Office of OPM, Office of Personnel and Management, to make sure that our federal employees, that they are protected against anti-Semitism, but also against Islamophobia and actions taken against Muslim Americans. And the government's got to walk this line carefully, because while I don't think it is appropriate to support a terrorist organization, just because you're a federal employee doesn't mean you give up all your First Amendment rights. So making sure that people feel safe in the federal workforce, in the workplace as well, that they're not harassed, whether their faith is Muslim or whether their faith is Jewish, is something that we've got to keep attention to. Because, the remarkable thing is for all our flaws in this country, we are the only country that has both diversity of race, diversity of faith backgrounds, that we come together. And we have felt some of that fraying in recent weeks. I can tell you, I have felt it as I meet with Muslim Americans, Palestinian Americans from our region. I feel it as I meet with one family I met with yesterday who is formerly residents of Richmond, now live in Israel, and to see the images of their son who had his arm blown off on October 7th, and they don't know 40 days into this tragedy whether he is even alive. The anger levels are so high. I echo that, as I have to say as well, with some of the Palestinian Americans who one doctor came in and showed me picture after picture after picture of family members who have been killed since October 7th. So how we treat our federal employees, regardless of faith background, is important as well.
Senator, our next question is Raquel Martin with Nexstar.
Hi, Senator. Thanks for taking out the time. So this week, Senator Schumer said he had spoke with you recently about recommendations when it comes to AI regulation. Would you say that there are renewed discussions about trying to rein in, excuse me, did I say AI? I meant to say TikTok. TikTok in particular.
Well, listen, we have seen, outrageous videos on TikTok. There have been reports of videos that perpetrate a lie that somehow October 7th didn't happen, or October 7th happened because Israelis killed their own people. That's a blatant lie. But let me also say there have been, really bad misinformation, disinformation on Twitter, now known as X, and on Facebook, now known as Meta. And we've seen American platforms as well restrict and cut back on trying to do any content moderation. The reason there's been focus on TikTok, and I think TikTok is an enormous challenge, and let me quickly add that there is great imagination on TikTok. There's social influencers. I love some of the creativity, but I do think there is a huge problem when this platform, which 40% of Americans between 18 and 24 get virtually all their news from, that the algorithms that show you what video is coming up next, because you don't choose that, is ultimately controlled by the Communist Party of China. And I think it is a huge problem. We put forward a broad bipartisan bill supported by the administration that would say, let's not isolate a single country, but a company, but let's go after those technology companies that pose a national security threat that come from China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, Cuba, and Venezuela. All countries have been designated. And the fascinating thing was we were moving right along until TikTok dropped $100 million in lobbying and putting commercials on virtually every TV station that's on the line and every political publication in America. And we were suddenly attacked from the left and the right. That's a long answer to the question of, yes, there's some renewed interest. I'm happy to see some renewed interest from some of our House Republicans who, unfortunately, once some of the political pressure rose from the right, didn't seem as interested in this subject. So we are pursuing that. We had a brief yesterday with our Commerce Committee members on misinformation and from what's called malign foreign influence. And it's coming not just from China, it's also coming from Russia, particularly trying to undermine American support for Ukraine. So this issue isn't going away. And let me just quickly add, AI component is important because what artificial intelligence can do, and I promise I won't launch into a whole AI pitch here, but what artificial intelligence can do in terms of misinformation, it can do it at such a scale and speed than even a fairly inept provocateur in the past can now do this at scale and speed using AI tools that if it doesn't scare the dickens out of you, it should.
We're going to jump back to Mitchell Miller with WTOP.
Thanks for coming back to me. Sorry about that earlier. Senator, are you concerned, you touched on this, but are you concerned about the fact that emergency aid to Israel still has not been approved as the war continues along with Ukraine, and that the window for the supplemental, even though you're going to come back and address it, that it may be closing because, as you know, the support for aid to Ukraine has been waning?
Mitchell, I am concerned at a level that there's been very few issues that haunt me as much on a almost hour-by-hour basis than this. And I actually think when a vote came to a floor of the House or the Senate, that aid for Ukraine has not diminished as much as people are politically posturing. And if part of the price of this aid is to try to put some fixes in place on the border, I'm all in. Although people have been struggling for border solutions since at least 2013-14 when we did the last bipartisan immigration bill that unfortunately never got a vote in the House, which if we'd voted on that then, we wouldn't have these problems at the border. But I also, and one of the things, Mitchell, I think you need to include in this package, it is Israel, it is Ukraine, it is Indo-Pacific, but it is also humanitarian assistance. Humanitarian assistance to Palestinians in Gaza, humanitarian assistance to folks in the West Bank, where unfortunately we've seen settler violence, humanitarian assistance to folks in Israel, but also if we don't want this war to erupt into a whole full regional war, some of this humanitarian assistance needs to go to one of our, next to Israel, our second strongest ally in the region, Jordan. And while we've done additional assistance in the past to Egypt, Egypt's economy is in really tough shape. So I hope and pray that some of the folks who are for example, strongest supporters on Israel will also realize the Israeli government itself has said we need this humanitarian assistance as well. And then on the issue of Ukraine, the eyes of history will be watching. And any member that votes against assistance to Ukraine at this moment, when the Ukrainians were in a bit of a slog here with Russia, and Putin believes he can outlast the West. And if you're willing to walk away from Ukraine after they have destroyed 50% of Russia's military capability, and walk away, in a sense, from NATO, after we've just seen Sweden and Finland join, and walk away from giving then a green light to President Xi in China or the leaders in Iran, I cannot believe that responsible Americans would take that kind of vote. And I tell you, when we had a couple hundred veterans here this morning, it was unanimous. All of those veterans thought that we should continue our stand with Ukraine.
Senator, our next question is Adam Longo with WUSA 9.
Hi, Senator. Thank you. And first of all, I'm just wanting to say that I'm grateful that we're not having to talk to you about any sort of physical confrontation that happened inside of the Capitol involving you. I did want to ask you about FBI. As mentioned last week, there was 145 Republicans in the House a week ago today that voted for this failed amendment that would have stopped the land procurement in Greenbelt for the FBI headquarters. I spoke with Congressman Connolly a couple days ago. He told me he would likely vote to do the same in the future, and he's also asking with Chairman Comer of House Oversight to have a standalone hearing on the site selection process. My question for you, sir, is do you support GSA's efforts to move ahead and acquire the Greenbelt property from WMATA?
We have to have this Inspector General investigation before there's any further movement. There is such a disturbing fact pattern. I go back to the two simple facts. Even after the criteria were changed to try to give Maryland an extra advantage, the career professionals, 2 from GSA and 1 from FBI, unanimously chose Virginia. If the shoe were on the other foot, and there had been political manipulation to help Virginia, our friends in Maryland would be calling, and rightfully so, for the same kind of investigation. So I just think the reality is this project's not going forward in any form with this cloud overhanging it. The Inspector General investigation somehow can justify, explain away, get testimony about why the career officials were overturned, why the obvious, even changed weighting system still favored Virginia, then I'd like to look at that analysis. But this process stinks. I don't get riled up on things very often, but again, I point to the fact that the unprecedented action of the FBI Director Wray to put out that kind of missive to all FBI employees, it's unprecedented.
Senator, our next question is Mike Gooding with 13 News Now.
Hi, Senator. Thanks for doing this. As you know, Senate Rules Committee this week passed a resolution to circumvent Senator Tuberville and get going finally on the 400 outstanding military promotions, but it still needs a vote on the full floor of the Senate. It's going to need 9 Republicans to cross over. Wondering when you think this vote could happen and how confident are you that it could pass?
Well, thanks for being on the line, Mike, but let me also, I want to answer that, but I just want to reiterate my earlier point. When we were together with all the folks from Ship Repair in Hampton Roads, tens of thousands of Virginians are employed in that industry, and the fact that they aren't going to have a full year funding certainty until February at the earliest, once again is a demonstration that these folks who are running the House, they may be politicians, but they sure as heck don't know Business 101. It is a stupid business decision. In terms of Tuberville, that was the other action that, and Tim Kaine did some great work on this the other night, the day before Veterans Day, and the day that Alabama had set aside to honor their military heroes, where he took one by one, and this grossly selfish senator objected, interfered with people's lives in a way that I find abhorrent. And I got to tell you, the veterans this morning, I don't know what political party most of them belong to. I presume, candidly, at least half were Republicans, maybe more, but they were outraged by Tuberville. So the fact that we got this out, I was out of the Rules Committee. I was disappointed that it was still a partisan vote, but Leader McConnell indicated that his patience had worn thin. He understood that we are undermining our national security when we don't allow people who've earned a right to promotion to get that promotion. My hope is that by the time we come back, I hope in those first few days back, we'll get this on the floor. And then let's let people vote, not party, but conscience. The very people who say they want to support our military, well, you can do that by making sure that people who have earned the right to get promoted don't get played as political pawns. And that's what's happening right now by one senator on a totally unrelated issue.
Senator, our next question is Gene Marrano with WFIR. Gene? Going to move on to Sean Davis with Wavy.
Hey, Senator. I was wondering, what do you think about the prospect for a ceasefire in Gaza? And then what is your understanding of where the Biden administration stands on that? What is their thinking on that now?
Well, I and many of my colleagues have called for a short-term cessation of hostilities to get more humanitarian aid in. And we've seen brief pauses. The challenge that we're faced is that, a long-term ceasefire would simply leave Hamas in place. And Hamas, even since October 7th, has reiterated its desire to basically destroy Israel. I can't talk about this beyond what's been in the public domain. I am enormously hopeful that the New York Times reporting becomes true that says there is close to being whatever we want to call it, a pause, but potentially a pause for days that would also allow the beginning of some of the hostage exchange and freeing of some of the hostages. That would be a great step forward. It also means we have to get additional humanitarian aid into the innocent civilians, the innocent Palestinians living in Gaza, and we need the Israeli government to allow that to flow, and we also need the Israeli government to take firmer steps to shut down the settler violence that's happening in the West Bank. I have been talking about this for months. I really feared that where this kind of explosion would have taken place would have not been Gaza, but would have been the West Bank, where, but for the Palestinian security services that are helping keep the lid on this boiling pot, that could blow any time. So restricting the settlers from violence, getting aid into both of those regions is not only the humanitarian thing to do, but it's also, I think, in the best long-term interests of Israel.
Senator, our next question is Lindsay Connett with WSLS.
Hi, Senator. Thank you for your time. Currently, there is a wildfire burning in Bedford County in the Jefferson National Forest, and I'm wondering what help, if any, can be provided from Congress. There are restrictions since it's in a national forest that crews are not allowed to dig or cut down trees to create barriers. They're not allowed to access the area using ATVs. So I'm curious, is this a topic of conversation? What help, if any, could be provided? Is there a chance that those restrictions could be temporarily lifted to battle the fire?
Well, my understanding, and I got this from a press report, so I hope it's accurate, that Virginia and the firefighters have been able to contain the fire as of this morning. Usually, and I say this as a former governor, even when you've got a fire on federal lands, if it affects your state, it usually is the governor that takes the lead on calling for federal assistance. And I'll, of course, work with the governor on that. If there are restrictions, because the National Forest, that is, even when the fire's under control doesn't mean it's fully out. If there are restrictions that would allow this fire to be put out quicker, and that means getting material in, ATV or otherwise, I would clearly support it.
Senator, our final question will be Amy Knowles with the Virginia Dogwood.
Hey, Senator Warner, thanks for taking our questions. This can be either more policy-driven or more personal, but what are you most thankful for this year?
Amy, I always appreciate you giving me something that maybe takes me out of the mindset right now. I'll give you two answers. I'm thankful that with all of the problems that our country has, we still live in a democracy. We still live in a country where literally people will give up their lives to try to almost break into America to have a little bit of the rights and responsibilities that we have each and every day and sometimes take for granted. And it's one of the reasons why I am so concerned, particularly about authoritarian nations pushing back democracy as Putin is trying in Ukraine. And on a personal basis, I just got to say, this is a hard job, particularly this last couple of months, and some of these conflicts are aching on my heart in a way that I've been doing this for a while, very few things have. And what allows me to kind of get up and rally each day to do this is I'm thankful for my family. I'm thankful for my friends. I'm thankful for the kind of support network. I'm thankful, I hate to say this on tape, I'm thankful for my staff who help keep me focused and centered as well. And I hope all of us take a moment and as we go into Thanksgiving week, and I won't be doing this next Thursday. We have an annual tag football game that even as an old guy I still play, and next Thursday about 4 o'clock, family and friends, about 25 of us, will sit down at Thanksgiving, for our Thanksgiving. And I want to wish, I hope all Virginians will frankly, and all of you on this call will take a moment and maybe at least answer for yourself the question Amy just asked me. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.